I was a data scientist at Meta, a business intelligence engineer at Amazon, and a quant at Bank of America. But my entire career was about doing as much work as possible in the least amount of time. And I got pretty good at it. At Bank of America, I was working 2 hours a day because I figured out how to automate most of my model development process. And at Amazon, I figured out how to automate my job and then got promoted. So that was pretty cool. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a data analytics AI agent. So whenever you get one of those pesky ad hoc data requests from your business partners, instead of you having to go out and write the query and pull the data, an AI agent will do all of that automatically for you and talk to your business partners directly. Let me show you what the final product looks like. So whenever someone asks you a data question, your AI workflow will go ahead and pull the latest from the database schema, run a first AI agent that will write the SQL query, then run a second evaluator AI agent that will validate that the SQL was correct and run the query for you. Now here's where it gets really interesting. If the evaluator agent says the query is correct, then it'll just go ahead and answer the user question directly. But if it says the query is wrong, it will actually give the feedback back to that first AI agent so the agent can rewrite the query. All of that without you, the data analyst, data scientist, or data engineer having to step in. But of course, even though this entire workflow is automated, you as the data professional are responsible and accountable for the accuracy of the data. So you might be thinking, what happens if something goes wrong? The way we have this set up, you can trace exactly what happened at each step of the process, so you can quickly debug where it went wrong and exactly what happened. So I've built this entire process in n8n, which is a workflow automation tool. But why use n8n? There are so many different ways to build an AI agent these days. You can build it directly in Python code. You can use an agentic framework like Claude Code or Codex. There's so many these days. Or you can build it in a workflow automation tool like n8n, which I've chosen to do for this example. There are pros and cons to building with each of those different methods. The benefits of building in n8n are, number one, it's really easy to understand, right? So I showed you the workflow that we're building, and you can see it's very visual. You can see exactly what happens at every step of the way. Sometimes I feel like when you're building with Claude Code or Codex, those AI agents are a little bit of a black box. You see the inputs and the outputs, and you can see some of the reasoning in between, but it does give you less control and make it harder to understand what exactly happened. Step 2 is traceability. This one's so important if you're going to put an AI agent into production. You need to know what happened every step of the way, what decisions were made, what tools were called, what were the inputs and outputs. And in n8n, it's so easy to see that in the logs that we looked at earlier together. And number 3 is self-hosting. You can self-host your n8n instance on your own servers, which means that your data, your credentials, your logs, they all kind of exist only within your server and doesn't go out into the world. There is a caveat here though. If you do connect to any kind of external platform like OpenAI, Anthropic, or Slack, etc., your data are going to those external platforms. So self-hosting does give you the option of keeping all your data within your infrastructure, but it's very much dependent on the design of your workflow. All right, shall we start building the workflow together? I'm going to do this node by node in n8n, but if you want to just download the final workflow, I put it in the comments. It's completely free. It's just a JSON. So yeah. All right, let's get started. Our first node is going to be a chat message node. So basically we're saying we'll start the workflow or trigger the workflow when we receive a message. And that message would be a question from our business partner. So we're going to add that in as a on chat message. And we can use the default settings here in n8n. This is a really simple node compared to some of the ones we're going to see later on. So later when we're testing our workflow, we can type a message here and that would trigger our entire workflow. For the process of building, we're using the inbuilt chat node in n8n. But when you do put this in production, I recommend wiring it up to like a Slack or Microsoft Teams or email instead of the n8n chat node, because it'll make it a lot easier for your business partners to ask questions through those platforms that they're already using. Okay, step 2, we're going to get the metadata or the database schema. In the real world, you would connect your n8n workflow to like a semantic layer, which not only has your data model, but also your business metrics definitions. That would be the most official and proper way to do it. But to keep it simple here, we're just going to run a SQL query to get the database schema. Okay, so in here, we're going to add in a Postgres node. This will give us a few options on what to do. We're going to go with execute a query. I like execute a query because it gives us the most flexibility in how we set up this node. We're starting at the top here. We're going to connect our credentials. This is like with any kind of Postgres connection credential string. I already have 2 accounts connected, so I'm going to pick the right one. Next, we're going to put in the query. So I am using this SQL query to get the database schema. So this is a pretty convoluted, hefty query, but what it's really doing is pulling the database schema or the metadata from the database and putting it into one giant string. All right, step 3 is where things get really exciting. We're gonna build our first AI agent node. But before we actually build that in n8n, let's talk about the 3 components every AI agent has. The first is going to be the brain. That is your AI model. That could be OpenAI, Anthropic, any big model provider, or really any open source model. Part 2 is going to be memory. Because AI agents do take multiple steps to complete a task, a memory allows it to remember what it had already previously done and load that context into its reasoning. And then component number 3, that's going to be your tools. Tools allow your AI agent to take action. They are optional, so you can have no tools for an AI agent, or you can have more than one tool per AI agent. So we're going to go ahead and add in the AI agent node. For the prompt, we're actually going to define that ourselves. I already have this written out, so let me paste this in and we'll walk through it together. All right, so we're saying using the database schema, write a SQL query to answer this user question. We want to make sure it starts by getting samples of the tables to query because this is a very real production database, so it's kind of a huge mess. So I find that having the AI agent run a small sample query to look at the first 5 rows of the table allows it to write more accurate queries later on. Then we're going to go ahead and give it the database schema that we got previously. We're also going to pass in the user question from the chat message node, and then we're going to ignore this one for now, but we'll come back to it later, I promise. Okay, and finally, we have the tools available. Here we only have one tool. We're going to go with a Postgres tool where we're going to allow our AI agent to run a small sample on specific tables in our database. Okay, and finally, I want to be very specific about what I want the AI agent to return. Here, I want it to only return the final SQL query that answers the user question and nothing else. Okay, so now we have the prompt done. Let's go ahead and we're going to add in the 3 components of every AI agent that we talked about. So starting with the chat model, here I'm going to go with OpenAI. You're going to connect to OpenAI using your OpenAI credentials. Then you're going to pick the model that you want. Usually when I'm just building and testing, I will use like a smaller model, like a mini model, just because it's cheaper and a lot faster. But since I know this workflow works, I'm going to go ahead and just use GPT 5.6 tool. Next, we're going to add in memory. For this one's really simple. We're just going to use simple memory, which stores it in n8n, so you don't need any external credentials. If you do want to store your chat history in somewhere more formal, more long-term, you can go ahead and use these other options, but for now, just simple memory is fine. Now we have to define a session ID because the way memory works, it stores it within a session. So from here, we're going to define it below, and we're actually going to use the session ID from a previous node. We can go ahead and change this context window to 10 also, but really you can play around with that one to see how much context or past interactions you want the model to have. Finally, we're going to add in our tool. Remember, we have a Postgres tool. I'm going to use the exact name here, which is retrieve a sample of rows. So here we'll search for Postgres. I'm going to make sure we're connected to the right Postgres account. And for operation, I'm going to use execute query again because it gives us a lot more flexibility. Let's rename this node real quick. And under query, we are going to allow the AI agent to define what that query is. Okay, so this is how we're going to do it. To be honest, I don't really understand this string, but basically we're saying we're allowing the AI to define this SQL query within reasonable boundaries. Okay, I believe we have everything set up for the AI agent. So now let's go ahead and test out this workflow starting from the beginning. So we're going to open up a chat. I'm actually going to start a new chat here. How many users signed up in the last 7 days? So we'll see it's going to trigger the workflow. We're going to get the metadata, and now the AI agent is off to thinking. Okay, so that ran pretty quickly. So let's look at the AI agent. We can see that it outputted a SQL query for us, which, to be fair, this is a pretty simple query. So this is probably going to be a correct query. But what's more interesting is when we look in the logs, we can see the actual steps that the AI agent took. So it always starts by retrieving a memory, then it goes ahead and calls the chat model. You can see our prompt in here. And then it went ahead and it ran a small sample, select star from limit 5 on one of the tables, like we told it to. And then we can see the output of these very specific tool call, right? So that's going to be a SQL output. So the output here, you can see it actually returned the first 5 rows of the data, so it could examine what exists in that table. Oh, one last thing, I always forget to do this. Let's change the name of our AI agent. Let's call it SQL query writer agent. All right, step 3 is done. Let's move on to step 4. This is our second AI agent that's going to run the evaluation. This is going to look quite similar to the previous one, so I'm going to go over it a little faster. We'll start again by adding another AI agent node. And we're going to define the prompt below. So I've already written this prompt, but let's go over this together. Okay, so the prompt says, given the database schema and the user question, you're going to evaluate the accuracy of the SQL query. I also told it not to nitpick because sometimes AI does tend to get a little bit nitpicky. Here we're also saying you are to use the Postgres tool to run the SQL query. That way it can actually get the output or the data from that query. So then we have our inputs. We have our schema and user question, same as before. Now we have one more input, which is the query that was written by the previous SQL query AI agent. And then again, we're going to specify what tools they have available. Here we have a Postgres tool, and we're going to call it a execute a SQL query in Postgres. Now for the output, there's going to be 2 options. So one is if this AI agent determined that the SQL query is correct, then we're going to say evaluation equals true. And then for the details, this is going to be a string. We're going to say a sentence answering the user question directly using the results of the query. Do not explain the SQL query or the input data. You can already imagine this is exactly what I want to return directly to my business partner who's asking the question. Now, the second option is if this is wrong, return evaluation equals false. And then for the details, it's going to say feedback and then the feedback on how to fix the query. I'm going to show you this in a second, so it's a little bit easier to see. And you can see here, because we have a very specific output format that we want n8n to follow, we can go ahead and turn on require specific output format. And it tells us to connect an output parser. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to connect an output parser, and we're going to select structured output parser. And you can see it says return data in defined JSON. And so you're going to put in an example here. So following the format that we defined earlier, we're going to say this JSON needs 2 fields. The first is going to be evaluation, which is going to be a Boolean. And then we have a details, which is going to be a string. And this is just an example. Now, we're going to connect in the 3 components of an AI agent. That is the chat model, your memory, and your tools. I'm going to do this pretty quickly. So for the chat model, just for fun, I'm just going to use an Anthropic model this time. Sometimes I like to pit the different AI companies against each other, just so I know there's some variety in the way the models are trained. So Sonnet 4.6 for this one looks fine. Now we're going to throw in memory, and that's going to be, again, the simple memory. We'll define the session using the chat message session ID. We can bump this up to 10 again. Now we're going to put in our tool, and just let me get the name of the tool real quick. We wanted it to be called execute a SQL query in Postgres. So we'll search for the Postgres tool. Go ahead and rename this real quick and make sure I'm connected to the right Postgres account, and we're going to use the execute query option again. Similar to before, we're going to use a long convoluted formula. Again, I don't really understand it, but I'll copy and paste that in. If you are ever unsure how to write this, I recommend using the n8n AI function. I find that to be one of my favorite AI agents ever built into production. This is not an ad. I really just enjoy that functionality. And you can find that in here. Okay, let's go ahead and test this out. So we'll open up the AI agent, and then because the previous steps were already run, I'm going to open these again so you can see it. We're just going to click execute step and see what happens. We can see that the AI agent, we're going to rename this AI agent real quick. Evaluator agent. All right, that ran great. So we can see that the agent got a SQL query, and then it outputted its evaluation of the query. And then because it evaluated the query to be correct, it went ahead and actually answered the user question directly. So let's look in the logs. We can see, again, the different steps the AI agent took. It always starts from memory, then it goes into the chat model. And if it decides to use tools, it will go ahead and call one or more of those tools. All right, we're so close to being done. We just have 2 very simple nodes left. The next node that we're going to have is going to be an if-else gate. Because you saw earlier from our evaluator agent that evaluation can be true or false. If it's true, we want the AI agent to go ahead and just respond to the user question directly. But if it's false, remember how the AI agent gives feedback on the query? we're going to take that feedback and we're going to give that back to that first SQL query writer agent so it can fix its mistakes. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select the if gate. That's going to be our gate, right? So if evaluation is true, we'll go ahead and send that off to the user. We'll do that in a second. But if it's false, we want to wire this back to that first SQL query writer agent. Now, let's go back into the SQL query writer agent. Remember this portion of the prompt that I was like, we're going to talk about this later? This is where that comes in. So it states here that if they had previously attempted to write a query, this would be empty if it's the first attempt because there's no feedback yet. But if it's present, the AI agent must rewrite the query to address the feedback, and we put in the feedback in here. Okay, just because I want to finish this off before testing it out, let's do the final node. So the way the chat message works in n8n, for us to respond to a user question, it must end on a field that's called output. So let's do that really quickly. We're going to set a field here, and we're going to rename the details to output. Let's test these two steps out. So it's rerunning that SQL query writer. Okay, so that looked like it ran. Sorry, so ignore this chat for now. We'll get back to it. I think something ran incorrectly. So we're going to see in the if-else node that because evaluation was true, it went ahead and sent it out the true branch. Now, I think I have to execute this step. Okay, so I did not do this correctly. This basically says I'm sending details to the string output, which does not make any sense. That was a big brain fart. So that's actually called the field output. And then we're going to drag in the value from details from the previous node. This should work. So let's see. So I think it's rerunning the entire AI agent again. That's okay. We'll just wait to see what it does. Great. So it renamed the field output. Okay, so now the edit fields should be working. We're using output equals to the details from the previous node. Let's restart a session in the chat and just have it run all over again. How many users signed up in the last 7 days? So we can see the model's thinking. It's looping. First agent done. Second agent is working. Awesome. And then it answered the question. So that works correctly. Just recap what happened at the end there because I think I wasn't being super clear. So we have an if gate, and if it's true, like the evaluation for the SQL query returned that the query is correct, we go ahead and set the output field to be the answer to the user's question. Okay, before we finish off the building, I want to make sure we're looking at this false loop once real quick, right? So remember, if the query was determined to be incorrect, we're going to send feedback back into that first SQL query writer agent. Let's test to see what that looks like. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to hack this real quick. I'm going to say for testing only, if this is your first attempt at writing a SQL query, intentionally make the query wrong so that I can test my feedback loop. Okay, so let's see if this works. So we're going to again restart a chat session and ask the same question. How many users signed up in the last 7 days? Now, hopefully we'll see that we'll be able to follow kind of that false evaluation loop back here. We do see that the false loop is looped up, but there is an error. Let's look at this real quick together. Okay, so it gave me an error and I'm not really sure what happened. So let me just ask the AI assistant. Again, I love these n8n AI assistant thing. It's going to go ahead and try and debug it for us. So it wants to edit the workflow directly. I'm just going to allow it to do that. There was an error in the way I was referencing the session ID because n8n uses this paired item tracing. So when I edit the if loop, it's kind of like looking for something that doesn't exist. And so it basically updated item.item to .first, and that seems to work. So let's go ahead and test this one more time. I'm going to start a new session and maybe let's ask a different question this time. How about that? We'll say, what was our subscriber churn rate in the last 7 days? So a little more complex question here. Quick, while that is running, one of my favorite things about n8n is our ability to look at the logs, right? This is the traceability, the auditability that we need when we put AI agents into production. We need to know what exactly happened at every step and what decisions were made. So if things go wrong, we know where it went wrong and we can fix it. So we can see in here in the logs that we can see exactly what steps happened in the workflow, down to even the sub-steps within each agent. And when you click on each of those steps, you can see the exact input and output for each of those steps. So let's click this one, for example. You can see input, output. Okay. And it looked like our question was answered using the AI agent. Manually answering ad hoc questions can be so time consuming. It's not just the time it takes to like read the request, write the query, and send it out. It's the fact that you know there's going to be follow-up questions, and also just the context switching is such a costly activity. So building an AI agent like this means that for ad hoc questions that your business partners have, they don't have to come to you. They can go straight to an AI agent. And of course, if they have more complex questions, you can do those yourself. But this will take a lot of that menial SQL querying work off your plate, which means that you have more time to work on higher value tasks as a data scientist or a data analyst. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my channel and comment below on what other videos you might like to see. Also, you might enjoy this video too.